I think if there's a destabilization of the region, that can be laid at the feet of an Iranian regime. Condoleezza Rice, US Secretary of State.
Welcome back to Inside Iraq. Our subject today is the mutual accusation and frustration between the Saudis and the Iraqis. Before the break, I asked Khalid al-Ma'ina, why is it the Saudis are unhappy with al-Maliki?
Well, I don't think so. The Saudis are unhappy with al-Maliki. We do read newspaper reports, especially emanating from outside. Yes, there are differences of opinion, but I think for Saudi Arabia, a strong, stable, and secure Iraq is very important. The foreign minister has said that we do not want the division of Iraq and anyone who can deliver the goods. Apparently, the Iraqi government is not fully in control with factions, militants on either side. So I don't think so. For us, you see, whoever leads Iraq to a better future would be welcomed by all. So I don't think so. It's a question of snub.
But there is an underlying assessment, Khalid, that al-Maliki somehow is an agent of Iran. In the New York articles, the officials are saying that they were given documents alleging that al-Maliki told Muqtada al-Sadr to flee before the upcoming surge, and somehow one way or another they don't trust him.
But then again, I mean, there was this American report that said that these documents were forged, so we do not know. It's very easy to pinpoint so-and-so is an agent of this country or so-and-so is an agent of that. I think to be a statesman and to really rise above this petty politics, one has to look at things on a wider through a wider vision. We should not sort of fall prey to these kind of things. But for Saudi Arabia right now, I think the underlying factor in any policy towards Iraq is to see a government that really delivers the good. And what we see now is absolute mayhem in Baghdad and all around Iraq.
What we haven't discussed yet is that Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Secretary of Defense Bob Gates have just completed a tour of the Middle East, which was not very successful. In other words, the U.S. wanted to have a big peace conference, and nobody seemed really wanted to engage in that. And Secretary Gates said something that was really very, very important that has been missed. He is very disappointed with the state of political reconciliation in Iraq. This is pretty obvious, but the U.S. government really has not admitted this before. And the fact is that the Iraqi government is failing, and this is one of the reasons why states in the region, such as Saudi Arabia, are very, very nervous. If the Maliki government falls, what replaces it? That is a huge question. And so right now, these uncertainties are weighing heavily, and they are obviously influencing the states in the region.
Joost, Harlan just linked 2 points. Let's just separate them. He linked Iraq and the Middle East, but let us stay with al-Maliki. The sentiment in Saudi Arabia and in the rest of the Arab world actually is accentuated within Iraq. Many Iraqi factions, political groups and entities, they don't look at al-Maliki as a national leader. They look at him as a leader of a segment or a faction.
Well, we can blame the Saudis for many things. I'm sure we can blame many states in the region for things, and we can most of all blame the United States for totally failing in succeeding in bringing this enterprise to a successful conclusion, for stabilizing Iraq, for example. Clearly, and I think what Secretary Gates said was particularly illuminating the other day when he mentioned that they hadn't fully appreciated the nature of the insurgency and that it would be as potent as it turned out to be. And I think the US has made many, many miscalculations from the very beginning. The biggest mistakes were made right at the outset. And now we're facing a situation where we have a weak government in Baghdad that is also sectarian-based and ethnically based. We have total polarization between the various groups. And so, yes, the states in the region are very worried. They're worried, first of all, that Iraq will fall apart. And then secondly, if it doesn't fall apart, that it will allow to expand its sphere of influence in the region. And so both scenarios are very negative for the Arab states in the neighborhood. And what they would like now is for the United States to stay there, to bring a modicum of stability to Iraq, and preferably under a government of national unity that would bring the Sunni Arab community fully within that government and into the institutions of the state.
Khalid, Iraq is in chaos. It's a big quagmire for the Americans, let alone for the Iraqis. The Americans looking on the other side, they are trying to resuscitate the Middle East process. And in the process, they are angry with the Saudis for stepping forward and taking a very active initiative, whether it's the Mecca Accord between Hamas and Fatah, or perhaps one way or another frustrating the American stance regarding that part. Is there a link? Are you being punished for being active in the Middle East process?
Well, I mean, they can say what they want. I mean, people are free to do so. But I think it was very important for the Makkah Accord to get Hamas and the Abbas government under a unity government, and we really tried. The Saudi government tried hard, and the main reason is, I asked many senior officials in Saudi Arabia, was that they didn't want to see bloodshed in an already occupied land. On one hand, this is a big prison, and you have the prisoners killing each other, which are the Palestinian people. So I don't think so, and I don't think so that we should, go on a foreign policy course that pleases others. We live in the region. We know what are its problems. We know what is going to happen if the right decisions are not taking place. I think the United States can be a great harbinger of justice if it really does many things. Number one, implements all these resolutions that are gathering dust, 242, 338. The Arab Peace Accord in 2002 was met with, in a very disastrous fashion by the occupation and the attack on the late Arafat. So I think whatever we do, we are being criticized.
One of the criticism right now, Harlan, for the Saudis is the financial support they are going to the Sunni tribes. From the Saudi perspective, occupiers come and go. The United States may be in Iraq now, but in about 2-3 years from now, perhaps they will be gone. But these people are our people. These tribes, we are in the region for hundreds and hundreds of years. Some of them, they have a Saudi background. They keep going back and forth across the border. So can you see why the Saudis are supporting them financially when everybody else gets a support from somebody else?
Well, the obvious answer to your question is yes, and the same thing applies with Iran and the Shia. And if I could just focus on Iran for a second, because this is really the looming specter, the potential crisis. Remember, American strategy after World War II in the Middle East was to use Saudi Arabia as a balancer. It was the two-pillar policy with Saudi Arabia and the Shah, Iran, to balance the Soviet Union, and now we're trying to use Saudi Arabia to balance Iran. I think that's a huge mistake. I think that's apples and oranges. And the more we try to do that, the more pressure I think we put on Saudi Arabia. You add on that the issue of potential nuclear weapons programs on the part of Iran and whether or not the United States might actually launch a strike against Iran. And now what you are doing is increasing the tensions without a clear-cut policy. Now your point about inherent Saudi support of other tribes and other Sunnis, albeit wherever they are, is going to be very, very difficult to stop. And this becomes a very difficult point for the United States because many Americans believe the Saudis are continuing to support terrorist groups. So this is going to be a further irritant, if you will, in the absence of a larger strategic plan. And the more that we have these irritants, the more likely it is that relations will get worse. And if Iraq continues on the current path and does fragment, which it seems to me is unfortunately quite likely, the pressure will be on Saudi Arabia. The United States does not seem to have a policy for the Middle East on which to anchor relations with Saudi Arabia, and so therefore these uncertainties could really spill out of control.
Joost, one fear for the Saudis is that the repetition of the Afghan war between 1980 and 1988 is not going to happen, and that is those Saudis, jihadis, they go to Iraq to pursue the Americans, to acquire knowledge and to acquire technical military expertise, and then they come back to Saudi Arabia. That is one thing. It's against their policy, it's against their interest, and yet how do you stop it? How do you stop these new militants somehow fragmenting and dispersing all over the Middle East?
Oh, I think it's very likely that these people will start coming back to their home countries or go to Europe. In some cases they are from Europe. And it's going to be very difficult to prevent that. If the situation in Iraq continues to be unstable and al-Qaeda in Iraq thrives, then it is very likely that there will be a decision taken to send some of these people to their home countries in order to try to overthrow governments there and to extend the influence of this group throughout the region. I think the Saudis really will face a serious challenge when their citizens are coming back and come back with new skills and start doing the kinds of things we've seen them doing over the past few years.
In the last minute or a half left to me, Khalid, To what extent, as Harlan said, this is a tempest in a teapot, this is a tit for tat, that it will pass away, or is this perhaps the beginning of a longer and deeper rift between Saudi Arabia and the United States over the policy in Iraq?
As Harlan said, we need each other. I mean, Saudi Arabia as not only as a stabilizing factor in the future, as a supplier of oil, as a major country, not only important in the Arab world, but also in the Islamic world. But I think this could pass if the United States changes its policy, has a more clear-cut policy. We want friends, not masters. We want people to treat the area and look at it with, in a different view. I think if you solve or resolve partially the Palestine problem of Iraq, these problems go away. I do admit with these jihadis and the takfiris and all, they're causing problems. But let me tell our viewers that the main focus of people in Saudi Arabia from all levels is to see that the children get a first-class education.
Gentlemen, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To access the show and to send us your comments, please go to aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.